All right, we're at 8:02 and I am going to begin. Good morning to everyone. Thank you for joining us today for this important conversation. I'm Michele Goldsmith, the Vice President and General Manager of the Soundings Trade Only Group. I think we can all agree that this year has been a year like no other, and the landscape of business across the globe, no matter the sector, is in a state of flux. With that in mind, we've invited several key leaders with different perspectives from different regions to join us today to discuss the 3 T's: taxes, tariffs, and trade. It's a subject occupying the time, energy, and intellect of leaders worldwide. I would also like to thank our sponsors before we begin, Brunswick and Viking Yacht Company, for their support. So especially Lee Gordon, who I've been talking about this event with since last April, and Chris Landry from Viking Yacht Company for all of his input and support. This event would not be taking place without those 2 companies and their support. I encourage you to use the chat throughout our discussion today for comments and to use the Q&A for your questions. You'll see both on, I believe, the right-hand side of your screen or down below. I'll be monitoring both throughout the program. Also, today's event is being recorded, and the recording will be made available on tradeonlytoday.com in the next couple of weeks. So if there are other people that you want to share this conversation with, please feel free to do so. So thank you all for being here. As we have limited time, I'm going to say let's begin, and I'm going to introduce Malloy McDaniel. Malloy is a partner at the S3 Group, and he brings more than 2 decades of experience from working in senior levels of Senate leadership on Capitol Hill to founding a top government affairs firm representing numerous Fortune 500 companies. Over a decade on the Hill, Malloy was one of the founding partners of Westfront Strategies before joining S3 as a partner. At Westfront, he represented a broad range of Fortune 500 companies in various sectors, concentrating in tax, healthcare, energy, international trade, and government business. On Capitol Hill, Malloy served as a top advisor to Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, coordinating outreach and strategy with business groups, trade associations, and large coalitions in areas of tax, healthcare, financial services, and tech policy. Prior to his service in the leader's office, he was chief vote counter for Senate Majority Whip Mitch McConnell, helping to ensure big majorities for top legislative priorities of the Republican majority. He also assisted senators in advancing their personal legislative priorities and keeping close track of each senator's voting history on critical legislation. He started his Senate career working for Senate Majority Leader Trent Lott in a handful of roles, from lead Republican floor assistant to working in the Senate cloakroom, where he advised senators directly on floor proceedings and parliamentary procedure. So without further ado, I'm going to turn the presentation over to Malloy McDaniel. Good morning, Malloy.
Good morning, Michele. Thank you. Good to see everybody this morning. Thank you all for joining us. I've got a couple of slides I'm going to walk through here, kind of walk you through a little bit of how what we've done here in the first 6-7 months in DC, as it's been kind of quite busy, and kind of we'll walk you through kind of where we deal with tax and kind of where we think we're going here as it relates to trade and some of the rest of the year. We here at the S3 Group, quick note on us. We're a bipartisan lobbying firm here in DC, representing folks, Fortune 500 companies, trade associations around the country. Bipartisan firm. We do work with the administration, the House and Senate, and both sides of the aisle. You kind of want to set up. It's been a busy first 6-7 months here in Washington, right? If you look back the last year, which I think it's important to kind of look back how we got to this point. We had divided government, right? You had a Democrat president, you had a Republican House, Democrat Senate, right? And when you have some of that, things kind of tend to go slower. We kind of go from big bill to big bill. We'd hit these crescendo moments of, you'd have a spending deadline or some type of deadline that would be a forcing mechanism for Congress to act on something legislatively. We had the election in November. Republicans won all three branches of government, so it kicked things into high gear here. I will tell you, I think all of us in D.C. had kind of forgotten the pace of what it's like with Trump being president, and it was kind of quiet for the last 4 years. And boy, is it kind of really kicked into high gear as we move forward. A lot of folks say an hour is a day and a day is a year in the life here when you're living with Trump. When we came in January, things really kind of really moved rather quickly. Trump really worked, signed numerous executive orders. This is something that a lot of presidents do. Biden did it, Obama did it, Trump did it as well in his first term, just to kind of really kind of set the agenda for themselves. It's things they can do on their own. Trump made a big priority to do that as it relates to border security, his energy, some of his trade work as well. Another thing that you have to do when you start in the new administration is kind of setting up your own cabinet, right? You've got to get your people in. A lot of work was done on that to fill out the cabinet and also to fill out the kind of roles underneath the cabinet level positions. Republicans have worked on that very hard and are still continuing to do that. It's something they can control with Republicans controlling the Senate. They can move those nominees. I would say it's not quickly, but they kind of do it as expeditiously as they can. It is a process that nominees have to go through the hearings and the background checks and so forth. So that's something that kind of continues. Legislatively, as you look kind of here in the first part of the year, the one big beautiful bill, which we'll get into in just a second, has really been the big ticket. It's really taken all the oxygen out of the room in Washington, and that's something Republicans were able to do on their own. A couple things that have been done in a bipartisan fashion, just to flag it for you. The Lincoln Rally Act was dealing with immigration enforcement. That was something that got bipartisan support. And also you've dealt with the Genius Act, which deals in the crypto space and stable coins. That is something the Senate did in a bipartisan fashion the last couple of weeks, and the House will actually take it up and consider it today. But remember where we are here in Congress. Republicans have control, but Republicans barely have control, right? We've got a 53-47 majority in the Senate, and we're right at a 220 and 212 majority in the House. That House majority, razor thin, has fluctuated, right? You've had a few Republicans in the House who've been nominated to take positions in the Trump administration, so it's left a few open seats there. So the Speaker of the House has had a really delicate balance of working through all of that as we've kind of gone through the first 6 months of the year here. The one big beautiful bill that has been what has taken up a lot of oxygen time here on Capitol Hill. And I'll tell you, it's not only just been this first part of this year, but it really went into last year as well. And I think it's worth kind of here looking back as well. Some of you may remember a lot of talk about Chairman Jason Smith and Chairman Ron Wyden of the Finance Committee at the time put a package together last year. They kind of made the calculation, the two of them, they were kind of almost hedging their bets of who was going to win the election. They were like, let's get ahead of it. Let's do a bipartisan negotiated tax deal. They did that. And a bill that got 350, a bill that got 357 votes in the House. Big bipartisan support. Senate Republicans had a different view of what should happen there. Chairman Mike Crapo in the Senate and a few other senators took the idea that they would want to take this to Election Day, and they thought they would have more leverage and a better chance to get a better outcome after Election Day. Some folks thought they would be wrong with that. Some folks thought they were right. I think in their minds now they were proving right with winning the election, with Trump winning, and it gave Republicans a little more control of the pen as they wrote this policy. So keep in mind, a lot of work went into this bill last year, so it wasn't like we just started this bill in January. Republicans in the House, Republicans in the Senate had been working on this for more than a year, knowing that this was coming up, and this was the time they needed to act. The real deadline facing them was the end of this year to get all of this done. I think a lot of us thought it would maybe take 9 to 12 months to get this done. Congress acted rather quickly in our minds. They did it in the first six months of the year. What helped push that along was part of the one of the things they had decided to do was increase the debt limit, which is basically in paying the government's credit card. That is something we have to do from time to time. Republicans made the decision to do that on their own. They knew that deadline facing them was in August, mid-July to August. And so that's kind of where you had the July 4th timeframe come and the push to do it. I would tell you, Congress is a lot like us. When we were in school, we needed a deadline to turn our homework in, and we focus more and better when it becomes a deadline. A lot of the things in reconciliation, you all can see there, you all kind of dealt with in the business, the permanent extension of the tax cuts, the corporate rate staying at 21%, which was such a big win for Trump when they did the tax rates in his first term. The permanent extension of the individual rate, standard deduction, immediate expensing for qualified and R&D expensing, permanent extension of the bonus depreciation, and so forth. I think a lot of folks some folks have talked about, well, what's new here, what's not. I think what's new is, I think if you went back to ask folks last October how this is going to play out, what's new is the predictability and the certainty that business now has going forward, the permanent extension of some of these business policies. Some of the new things in the bill were some of the things that Trump talked about towards the end of his campaign: the no tax on tips, no taxes on Social Security, the no tax on auto loans. Those things were, some Republicans liked them. They understood the campaign side of those policies, and some Republicans, I'll be honest, didn't love some of those policies, and they tweaked them and kind of brought them back in, brought them back down a little bit. But those are some of the newer things that are in the bill. And now that the bill's done, you are seeing both sides kind of go out and try to sell the bill, right? If you're Republicans, you're going out, you're selling the positive things that you like about the bill. If you're Democrats and you vote against it, you didn't like the bill, you're going out and trying to outline some of the things that they felt impacted people in a negative way in the bill. And I think, it's one of the things where how it will shake out, we don't know yet. It's one of those things that will be determined in the midterm elections that we have that are upcoming for us in November of 2026. Trade and tariffs, I know, impact many of us on this call. It's, I think we kind of call it whiplash here, right? It's just, it's almost, you're not sure what the president's going to say on a daily basis or what he's going to wake up and how he's going to feel. It's something that he has been the driver on. It is something that Republicans have really ceded a lot of authority to the president on. You have a lot of Republicans, and I'll be honest, don't love everything that's occurring, but they're willing to give the president the latitude to kind of make some decisions and to kind of use his leverage to see what he can do here. It's still, unclear how this is all going to work out. You've seen a lot that's occurred over here in the last couple of weeks. We know we have a deadline coming up here on August the 1st that many of us are watching, not only with our own businesses, but folks around the world are watching. So we'll just kind of see how that all play out. One of the interesting thing is, Congress is here these next few weeks. The administration's been meeting with a lot of members. The trade rep, Secretary of Commerce, Secretary of Treasury have been on Capitol Hill meeting with a lot of members on both sides of the aisle, both sides of the Capitol, kind of bringing them up to speed, kind of where things are with trade. It's, as you can imagine, trade is an issue that many members are hearing about when they're at home from their constituents as well. I think on the last slide here, we just kind of throw up a few key dates that we can kind of continue to watch. We've got the Federal Circuit Court hears oral arguments in a case challenging the president's use of emergency authorities on sweeping tariffs on the 31st. We know that deadline of the 1st, it's coming here in a few weeks that Trump's kind of put out there. This last note here on the September 30th, the Senate passed a resolution to kind of to terminate the national emergency declaration that Trump is using to justify his reciprocal tariffs. The House kind of pushed that off until September. That was something the administration asked for. So that's just something we're watching here as it kind of relates to us here in Capitol Hill. And with that, Michelle, I'm happy to kind of take some questions. If that can be helpful, we can get into some other issues as well.
Sure. If you have questions for Malloy, please put them in the Q&A. Right now, that Q&A is empty, so your question would be top of mind. As you're writing your questions, I have two for you, Malloy. The first one, do you expect that there will be any additional reconciliation bills coming out of Congress?
It's a really good question. It's something, remember, those of y'all, we in DC are bad about using lingo. Reconciliation is a process that the majority party can use to get legislation through the House and the Senate and to the president's desk on just a simple majority vote. It's a budget controlled process, but it's what Republicans and Democrats have used when they've controlled all three branches of government. Republicans now have the option to do it a couple more times if they would like to. I will tell you there is a lot of scar tissue from what they just went through. It's a real bruising process. It's nothing they're looking to do immediately, but I think it's something you will see them attempt to do. They very well may attempt to do in the coming months. It's something they'll, as they look to be what else they could maybe do through reconciliation, through the process, working with their administration, working with the cabinet secretaries. It would definitely be more condensed. It's not going to necessarily be tax focused, right? Because we've kind of, I think, in their mind, handled all of the tax issues, all the business tax issues going forward. So I think they'd have to decide what they wanted to reconcile. And you can't just reconcile anything. They do have some rules and procedures that they have to meet. It's kind of got to go through a whole process. And so it's something that takes time. It's something, it took us 6 months to do this first one. It very well could try to, it's not something we could do in a month. It would very well take you multiple months, if not another 6 months. So is it a process they could start this fall? They could. Could it continue in the early part of next year? It could, but it would definitely take some time. But it's something that is on the table, and I think you will hear continued conversation about in the weeks and months ahead.
Yeah, I wondered, given the timing before we start getting into candidates and midterms, that they might try to do something. Yeah. We do have one question from Carl, which is, what is the status of tariff discussions with Taiwan?
Y'all may know better on that than I do. I haven't seen anything just recently in the last day or two. I think things are always kind of continue to change. I think we've seen, it's kind of, we went back and you looked at kind of the, was it a week ago I guess it was on a few weeks ago when the letters just kept coming out, right? Trump kind of kept posting those notes on True Social. They kind of came out every kind of 5 or 10 minutes. I mean, that's kind of world we're living in. You're kind of watching and waiting and you're really not sure who's next. But a lot of this stuff is going to kind of have a crescendo moment here in the next couple of weeks as you lead up to August 1st.
Yeah, and we have another person asking about Japan. I have a feeling that that you're going to have a similar answer there, that, getting into the details by country is not kind of in your...
But I think it's worth noting these exact questions are the same questions members of Congress are asking to the president, asking to the trade representative, asking to Secretary of Treasury. Like, I need details. I'm getting these questions from my constituents, from companies at home. What can I tell them? Where are we going? How is this going to end up? So they're great questions, and they're ones that folks on Capitol Hill can continue to ask.
If you had a crystal ball, when do you think the tariff discussions will settle out? Do you think it would happen in the September-October timeframe?
Boy, we would hope, but it's something that's just kind of been that's kind of been an ongoing thing. We've had kind of multiple punts here as these discussions have kind of continued. Remember, we also said we were going to get 90 deals in 90 days. That hasn't occurred. I think a lot of members on Capitol Hill would like to see it settled and settled down as we get into that September-October timeframe.
Wonderful. Well, Malloy, thank you so much for that information. We'll be staying in touch with Malloy, and we'll bring information to you as it occurs. So with that said, we're going to move on because we have a panel discussion about to happen. And before we do, I'd like to introduce you to the panelists. So first, we have Philip Easthill. He is the Secretary General of the European Boating Industry. which represents European recreational boating and nautical tourism industries with 32 members across 21 countries. The mission of EBI is to advance and represent a sustainable boating and nautical tourism industry. Key topics that EBI is working on include sustainability, circular economy, tourism, taxation, qualifications, access to finance, and international trade. He has been in the position since September 19th and worked in public affairs and regulatory affairs at the EU level. With an academic background in politics, business, and business management, he is also an avid sailor and has worked as a skipper and sailing instructor. So welcome, Philip.
Good morning. Good to be with you.
Thank you. Next up is John D. Personier. John brings more than 25 years of marine experience to his role as Director of Government Affairs and Sustainability for Viking Yacht Company. A dedicated advocate for boating and the marine industry, he leads Viking's response to policy and regulatory issues tied to trade, environmental compliance, fisheries management, and manufacturing. As part of Viking, John has spent 20 years with the Recreational Fishing Alliance, serving in various roles, including executive director. His work focused on protecting anglers' rights, supporting marine jobs, and promoting long-term fisheries sustainability. He currently sits on several key advisory boards, including ICCAT Advisory Committee, the Highly Migratory Species Advisory Panel, and the Hudson Canyon Sanctuary Advisory Committee. Welcome, John.
Good morning. Thank you for having us.
You're welcome. Robin Borsling, the Senior Vice President of Government Relations at the National Marine Manufacturers Association. Robin spent 15 years in various roles prior to NMMA. Robin spent 15 years in various roles, including VP of Infrastructure, Innovation, and Human Resource Policy at the National Association of Manufacturers, NAM. And prior to that, she spent 4 years in the U.S. Department of Transportation. So welcome, Robin. And finally, last but never least, Marie-France McKinnon. For the past 2 years, she has been the executive director of NMMA Canada. Prior to joining NMMA, she spent 5 years at the Canadian Meat Council in various roles, including senior vice president of public affairs and communications. So welcome to all of the panelists, and we're going to get started. I have broken down our panel discussion into 3 parts. We'll begin with taxes, we'll follow that with tariffs, and we'll finish with global trade. Again, if you have any questions or if you have any comments, please put them in the chat and or the Q&A. So let's start with tax, and I'm going to start with Robin and John. The recent tax bill that Malloy just talked about passed Congress. It includes sweeping changes to U.S. economic policy or a permanency of things that were begun in the first Trump administration, but everything from tax cuts to reshoring and American first incentives. So Robin, I'm going to start with you. How do you see this change in policy shifting the competitiveness of U.S. built boats and marine components on the global stage?
Thank you, Michelle, and thanks for putting this event together. That is a good opener, and if I accidentally pack too much into this answer, you are welcome to cut me off, because it's difficult to give an answer without even getting into tariffs, right? But so let's go into one big beautiful bill. You know, on the positive side of the ledger, this legislation essentially prevents the tax cliff that everyone was expecting to happen at the end of September, when the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act was set to expire. But it does more, as Malloy had outlined. It provides wonderful business operations certainty in terms of tax planning and investments, because it created permanency for many key provisions of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. So immediate expensing for R&D and equipment, 100% expensing for new factories and facilities in the U.S. There was a lot of positive for businesses in manufacturing in particular. There was great enthusiasm in the manufacturing community, calling for the extension of Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, strong support. Everyone had indicated that if this did not pass and the provisions expired, costs would be increased and would put the U.S. at a disadvantage. So with that said, on the other side of the ledger, we have the tariffs. And so where everyone is playing a balancing act in that this legislation passed and lots of enthusiasm and excitement and good things for manufacturing. Also, President Trump had highlighted how important this bill was for workers. This was not just for businesses, no tax on tips, no tax on overtime. So there was always this rationale, moving the bill forward was not just good for businesses and manufacturing, but really good for American workers. Yet on the tariff side and the unpredictability, even though we're in this quote unquote tariff pause for the next few weeks, the baseline 10%, the added, percent of tariffs, layered on top of layer here that we've seen over the past several months has created a great deal of uncertainty. And even, I'd say, with our North American supply chain and our relationship with Canada and Mexico, there among NMMA members, very high satisfaction with USMCA. And so with the uncertainty in the USMCA relationship, that creates consternation, costs. Everyone is factoring in, what this is going to mean in terms of profitability and how as a boat builder, how as an engine manufacturer, do you factor these things in? And among our members, we surveyed them fairly regularly once we started getting hit with the tariffs. 76% of NMA members indicated that tariffs, will impact their ability to compete on the global stage. That is a good majority of our members. It's very clear. So while the majority is excited and enthusiastic for the extension of the Tax Cut Jobs Act and the provisions and the permanency there, you have this uncertainty with tariffs.
Certainty and uncertainty all in one.
And so I don't want to say they cancel each other out because that would be a very strong statement. But the environment, the operating environment has improved on one area, but certainly remains difficult in another. And so when Malloy had made the reference that members of Congress are getting the same questions that people are popping into the chat, this really speaks to the need for the U.S. members and those that have facilities in the United States to keep their member of Congress, the elected official, up to date on what's going on in business and what's happening at the facility and how the uncertainty with tariffs does have an impact because the president and his team are calling members of Congress and checking in. And we are hearing that the uncertainty message is carrying forward. And that leaders at the House of Representatives and the Senate are telling that to the White House. Yes, we are pleased that we've delivered on tax reform, but it can't just stop there when we have to get to some certainty with these trade agreements.
Absolutely. I think I was telling you I was with one of the executives from Reynolds Wrap, and they were talking about where they manufacture, and some of it is not in the United States, and it doesn't matter what industry you're in. Is my point. The tinfoil industry is finding it as difficult as the marine industry is. So I think that it's important for us to be vocal with our members of Congress. So, John, I'm going to go to you as the OEM, the boat builder on this panel, and I want to understand how you see the bill's impact on boat sales. Do you think that now that it's passed, and that both people in business and consumers kind of know what's in it, that people who were hesitant, holding on to cash, will start spending? Or, as Robin mentioned with the tariffs, are they holding off to understand that first? Where do you see the impact from the tax bill, especially on boat sales?
Yeah, thank you. That's a good question, and one we're all kind of wondering about ourselves. On the consumer side, we obviously build products that people don't need to buy, and that certainly represents a unique challenge for us. So sales are extremely sensitive to market drivers, and they always tend to be cyclical in nature. So with that known, consumer sentiment is really an important and key factor. They really need to have a positive outlook. There needs to be some stability for them to commit to purchasing a boat. And even things like events on the world stage may even, dampen their mood or their buying. So, all these factors are coming into play on this. I will say, I think we all recognized, as Malloy talked about early on, that there were going to be some really big policy initiatives from the Trump administration that had the potential to cause volatility, which can disrupt markets like boat sales. Trade, tax, tariffs were going to be just a few of those. So I do think with the tax bill being signed into law, it is one step towards a more certainty, and hopefully an uptick in consumer confidence in the near future. So I think it is a really important first step. I think cash buyers will probably be in a better position in the near term. I think buyers utilizing financing may still be deterred by high interest rates for boat loans, which are still running in the 7 to 10% range, which are much higher than what we saw during the boating boom back a few years ago. So that's a big deal. And if tariffs continue to contribute to inflation, it may take some time for those rates to come down. Beyond even what we're anticipating that cut in September may look like. So there may be a lot of lag here. But obviously, too, there's also some other clear challenges that we have that are not directly linked to the tax bill. For example, just the cost of boat ownership is high, and it's a deterrent to entry. Materials for boats have increased. A lot of those are tied to the cost of oil, and some of the supply chain disruptions we've had and demand over the past few years have led to those prices going higher and boats being more expensive. Now with tariffs on top of that, we don't necessarily see prices for boats coming down dramatically. Another one is just the infrastructure. The infrastructure for boating is really stressed and in some places maxed out. So this is really an ongoing challenge. So just to sort of wrap that up, yeah, I think the tax bill being passed, signed into law is a great step forward, but it doesn't, I don't think, address all of the current concerns we have with the other two T's, trade, how that plays out on an international scale and domestically, but also on the tariff exposure side.
Yeah. So the other positive is that the markets have stayed strong through all of this, even
Correct.
with the uncertainty. So we're still looking at a strong Dow, S&P. So from there, Robin, you already answered my other question for you was going to be on the advantages and disadvantages of the bill. So you wrapped that all into one. So I really want to talk to Philip and Marie-France at this point. And my question to you, based on this tax bill, is, and the incentives that are there in it, what do you think the response is going to be in your country? Will your country respond with its own industrial policy, whether through tax incentives, reshoring, subsidies, or your region, I should say, or export support to ensure that your local manufacturers remain competitive? So Marie-France, why don't you start with that on how Canada is going to respond?
Great. Thank you so much, Michelle. Appreciate that. Canada's response to the bill is likely going to center around selective competitiveness initiatives rather than like sweeping subsidy framework. So recent federal budgets have really included investment in clean tech and critical infrastructure. There's been no industrial strategy tailored to sectors like recreational boating. I'll say, in fact, in Canada, the federal luxury tax has completely undermined competitiveness by encouraging offshoring of purchases, jobs, and tax revenue south of the border to us. So, we're keeping an eye on what's going to happen here. Prime Minister is doing an announcement later this morning on tariffs in aluminum. So we'll monitor that closely and see. But just want to echo what's been said so far. Consumer confidence, is definitely an issue. And from a Canadian perspective, there's definitely some brand nationalism is back, renewed interest in Canadian-made products. And I'm sure you've seen this on the news. It's affecting everything. Travel to the US is down, planned vacation down 70%. So that just tells you the mindset of the Canadian consumer. And, that will translate to the boating industry, but it has repercussions everywhere, right? Across the country and across the world. So it's kind of where we are and keeping an eye on how things unfold right now.
Yeah, it is an unfolding situation. So Philip, tell us about the EU and what the EU is thinking about the American tax bill.
It's a very good question, and thank you for having us, Michelle. And I definitely echo what Marie-France just said. It's about consumer confidence, and not just this bill, but also everything that's happening in geopolitics, trade. All of that is really poison for consumer confidence. So we could do with a lot without a lot of that. What's happening at European level? I mean, tax is not really a European mandate. We're 27 European countries in the European Union with an individual tax system everywhere. Even though now tax is somehow coming on the European agenda, but in fact not about lowering, but about increasing, bizarrely enough, because it's about generating funds for all of these new priorities that we need to have at European level, such as defense. Obviously, Europe has to spend a lot more on NATO, on defense everywhere. Also about competitiveness. This is a new key word at European level. It's all about competitiveness. There will be a big new subsidy pot called the Competitiveness Fund. Everything is about competitiveness. And I think many of those watching will know that the European Union historically in the last years has been very good at regulating, sometimes too much, sometimes too deep, often too deep, with too much reporting requirements for our businesses. And now there's an attempt, but let's hope it's successful, to go the other way. We maybe don't call it deregulation, but simplification. So the mandate of this European Commission, which is the European Union executive, is to decrease by 25% reporting obligations, by 35% reporting obligations for SMEs. And that's good news, because that's money they're spending, which they could be spending in better ways to market their product. So we're seeing some changes. This is not necessarily a reaction to the big, beautiful bill, but just to general geopolitics, trade developments. The European Union understands rightly that we have to be more reliant on ourselves, on our own market. That's what we can control. And in the European market, despite it being nominally a single market, there's still a lot of barriers. And that's what the European Commission wants to focus on at the moment. But none of that is made easier by trade issues at the moment. It's all about certainty or lack of it at the moment. But we'll get back to that later on, I'm sure.
Well, and it seems that the EU is more unified than ever. If anything, it seems like it's become more unified because of what's going on with the geopolitical pressures and the policy changes. True?
Yeah, definitely. I think if you look at the history of the European Union, it's always been forged by crises, and that's where it's been growing the strongest. And now it's about defense, but it's all about economy, single market, competitiveness, as I said. So yeah, definitely.
So Marie-France and Philip, I'm going to stay with you. We're going to move on to tariffs and supply chain. And I'll tell you, I feel for the supply chain people, especially some of the global supply chain people that I know. I spent some time in that world and ran operations for a manufacturing company. And it's a really tough job at this point. Someone said to me, it's a bit like playing whack-a-mole. Every time you think you have an alternative source somewhere that isn't going to be tariff, it changes. To me, it feels like when I was at Everest and we're all on the Khumbu ice fall together, and every time you have the ladders and the ropes set up, the ice moves. So I'm wondering how your members are trying to navigate these changes that the policies that may disrupt integrated what has been, most of our marine companies have relied on cross-border supply chains. So what policies, how are they handling those policy disruptions of these integrated either North American or transatlantic manufacturing networks? So Marie-France, why don't we start with you?
Thanks for that question. So, NMMA members, both in the US and Canada, we operate within a really, importantly integrated North American supply chain. So from engine to electronics and material, those cross the border multiple times before there was like a final assembly in either country. So mandating localized production in the US would cause fragmentation and really undermine the efficiency that the USMCA was designed to do and to enable on both sides of the border. So this supply chain works well and can't be restructured overnight without some serious consequences. So disrupting this flow would not only increase production costs and delivery times, but again, also impact pricing from consumers and fueling uncertainty at a time when affordability and confidence in the economy is already quite fragile. So stability in this cross-border trade supports consumer confidence, it helps control costs, and keeps recreational boating accessible for millions of North American families. And that's what's most important, is keeping those boats accessible for all the families and keeping those supply chains open.
Yeah, there's that perception that all boaters are wealthy, but really, if you look at the largest segment of boaters, it's, a family that has a trailerable boat that, what was it, Robin, you can probably speak to this better than I can, about $150,000 a year that they make.
$100,000 a year. Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of folks, who are not living on the coast of the United States, and they live in the inland, or Midwest, and have access to lakes and rivers, and so recreate in all sorts of different ways. And having an aluminum fishing boat is part of their activities on the weekend. An aluminum, fishing boat is, much smaller than the center console, easier to access and trailer around, and so there's a large volume of sales in those boats. And so
the same with pontoon.
Exactly. And this is a very diverse industry with a lot of different ways to enjoy boating. And one of our missions is to educate lawmakers on that, right? So they understand the different segments of the industry. They understand the impact, that 85 million Americans on average have taken to the water. And that we have 12 million registered boats, and that we cannot be just sort of forgotten about as something fun to do, and that this is a serious industry with a major manufacturing footprint in the United States. And telling that business side, we often say boating means business at American Boating Congress, but really detailing what that means and the jobs that manufacturers support in the communities is an important part of our message.
Well, yeah, as OR brought all of the outdoor industries together, and we realized that the GDP it produces is a higher percentage than agriculture, I think it really made members of Congress stand up. And to John's point, we had a jump in costs due to freight, due to scarcity, due to COVID, where there was a significant jump at COVID. I don't think prices went down post-COVID. And I think the fear now is that they're going to continue to rise. But I want to go back to Philip, because you haven't had a chance to answer that question about integrated networks of supply chain, and just wondering from the European Union side, I mean, even with boats that are manufactured in the EU coming over, there are American products that are put on boats that are brought into the country. There's such an integration between both sides of the pond. Wondering how your constituents are looking at that supply chain network.
Yeah, definitely. I think our industry has been very used, as every other industry, to this phase of integrated markets, moving closer together, reducing barriers to trade, which has been tremendously positive for our industry as and others. So that's what we've been used to. So I don't want to say this has been dismantled, but this has definitely been challenged now. And to see how that can be how we can adapt is very difficult, especially for our businesses. Like in the US over here, most of our businesses are small and medium-sized enterprises. So that's 96% of our members are small companies. We would call them mom and pop businesses, I think. And that's the reality. And for them, it's even more difficult to adapt their supply chains. And the other aspect, and this is a message we've been taking to the European Commission a lot, the markets are very specialized. So the boats that we export to the US and that we import from the US are really very different. And that's a good thing. But so that's a really important message that we take. And I think even if you look at automotive, they're struggling with all of this. They're not able to localize production suddenly in the US. So if they can't manage, we have almost no chance. And I think if I look at our businesses, there's not a lot of them that are able to open up another production plant in another country at the drop of a hat. And I think that's really important. And the other aspect that's crucial, I think, is the supply chain element, to educate policymakers about that. We've been able to do that fairly successfully in this, been able to take a few products out of the lists that are being circulated. But I think that's really important that we focus on that aspect, that we are not automotive, we're not a huge industry, we're an SME industry, but at the same time, we are still integrated, and we need that support.
And Marie-France touched on the sentiment in her country about doing business with U.S. companies and U.S. component suppliers. How are you finding that in the EU? Are you finding that there's more desire to go local?
To some extent, yes. I mean, obviously, made in sort of Europe or made in Germany, Italy, whatever it is, has always been quite strong and remains to be strong. I think, I mean, at least from what I've been reading the news in Canada, this is quite a lot. And you said some of those numbers earlier, Marie. We don't have those sort of that really anti-US sentiment when purchasing yet in Europe. There is a bit of that. If you want, you can find out all types of information about whether your product you want to buy is made in Europe or if the owner of the company is American, but not a lot of people are really interested in that. So I think it's still at a lower level, but it's certainly an issue that might increase in future. But we haven't yet seen it to a large extent in our industry, and that's good news.
And John, what strategy is Viking using as a U.S. manufacturer when it comes to components and supply chain that it uses? I mean, poor Rick Carroll, he's got to be pretty crazy right now.
The whole purchasing department is frazzled, I can tell you. But yeah, fortunately, Viking really does have a great relationship with all its suppliers. And we've been having these conversations on how we can collectively address the impact of tariffs without overburdening the manufacturing or the distributor side, but also not passing along too much of the cost to consumer, because we also know that market is soft right now, and it's also very temperamental. So we don't want to pass too much on to the consumer. So it's a real balancing act. One thing that Viking has done is that we've taken a real deep dive into our supply chain. And as you mentioned, it's proven to be far more complex and challenging than we really expected. We're starting to recognize that even parts and components, that we assumed were, made in America, still have tariff exposure. And it's the first time we're asking a lot of questions about country of origin, material, and really getting details about, making sure that the tariffs are all itemized, making sure that we're getting the HTS codes and the cost of those, and that's something we're pressing very hard, and we encourage other OEMs to do as well, is that when you have these conversations with your suppliers, really drill down to getting the details on those tariffs, the HTS codes, and the costs, because at some point that may change, or they may go away, and you may want to, back that off. So it's really important to drill down to that level. What we found is that by going to that level of detail, it's really helped us as we evaluate alternatives, but also understanding the impact. So if we can isolate the tariff in our accounting side, then we can calculate how that impacts our margin. And also then, we can use that information if we want to explore other options to offset. So, as you mentioned, like in some cases, we are looking at alternative sources. But I assume, like most boat builders, we're extremely conservative when it comes to materials that may have any impact on the performance or the quality. So it's not a decision we take very lightly, and not something we can do overnight to change a material or even a supplier, because there could be some unforeseen warranty or service issue that pops up from that change in the future. So that's something that, again, I think our industry in general is the marine environment and it's very unforgiving. So making some of those changes is something that, we have to think hard and long about.
Yeah, it's highly specialized. And
yeah.
I know some of the products I used to sell to your company, and they were specific to Viking. And I can't imagine that they'd be easy to find alternates for. And beyond that, just, I come from the component side of the business. What people don't really think about is the components within the components, no matter where they're made. We had a global supply chain where I worked, and trying to understand those components within each other is really difficult. You might be manufacturing a polyethylene seat in the US, but the T-nuts in the seat that take on the plate and the pedestal are coming from Asia.
That's a great point. And that's going back to my point. Like we said, these made in America components that we've been using for all these years, there may be an alternator, there may be a seal, there may be a pump on there that is coming from another country that has that tariff exposure. And then I think the final point, what we are finding is that, there are some items, some items that go into our boats that we don't have an immediate alternative for, simply because of the tooling, the design, the performance requirements, or simply the customer preferences. So in some cases, there's not an immediate domestic alternative that we can switch to overnight. And that's a real sticking point for us. It's going to take time to work through some of those issues.
Yeah, and you have longstanding relationships with those suppliers as well. So, everybody's got to work together. My other question on that is what's happening on lead times. I mean, we saw it in COVID where people really took a lot in and warehoused it in anticipation of things that were going to happen, or how long it would take to get more product. In anticipation of tariffs going into play, are suppliers taking in more product early? Are you finding longer lead times because they're looking for alternatives within their components? I'll start with John, but if anyone else wants to chime in on how this is impacting or how you expect this may impact lead times, I think that's going to wind up being a factor as well.
Yeah, I'll just jump in real quick and then hand off the floor. But in our conversations with a lot of our suppliers, what we found is that a lot of them were proactive. A lot of them staged material or brought in components or parts or product anticipating this challenge that we're dealing with now. And so I think what we're going to find is that we're eventually going to start working through that inventory, and some of these conversations where we're talking about availability and perhaps not even a price increase at this point, that is going to change, and things are going to be much more critical as we start to go through that inventory over the next few months or so.
Absolutely. Marie-France, Philip, Robin, anyone want to chime in?
I was just going to say, we're all sort of recounting the impact of, tariffs, on the marine industry and on the manufacturing side. It is top of mind for consumers as well. Consumers are thinking about tariffs, broadly speaking. They're thinking about inflation. And quite frankly, those two factors are depressing consumer sentiment. So the sooner the administration can sort of move on from the situation we're in and be in a structured place with negotiations and declaring the rate is the rate and it's, not movable, so to speak, I think the more we'll see consumer sentiment improve. And so I think it's important that when we as an industry are talking to our elected leaders, federal agencies, that we are very direct in communicating on the impact. We've flooded USTR with lots of comments, when the Section 232 investigations are happening. I think there was just one on copper. I think someone put it in the chat about copper and how that impacts the marine industry. Yes, it will.
Yes.
Engines, components, like there's a lot to it. And we've been at a disadvantage compared to the first Trump term, where there were exceptions and there were allowances placed. Whereas we're in an environment where it's been very clear from the administration, no exceptions unless one is crafted. But we have to communicate on multiple layers, and it's not just talking to the White House and the administration, but it's saying the same thing to the elected leaders and making sure they can place calls and they understand the impact, because we can't take anything for granted and have to bang on every door that's made available to us.
Absolutely. And I think the other thing we're going to start to see is scarcity in retail. I know that I saw it this weekend. I was in REI, and my REI in Chicago is empty. So I think that as they start to see that visually in a store, it's gonna come to roost as well. We have a question out of Julie Balzano asking how small U.S. businesses are coming up with creative ways to mitigate costs that can't simply pivot. So how are small companies managing the pressure while trying to stay compliant with trade regulations? Philip, do you want to start kind of on the EU side and how small business is reacting to this?
Yeah, I think, to be honest, most of them are sort of in a wait-and-see situation at the moment when it comes to the tariffs. And I guess it might be the same in the US, because we're waiting for those timelines, the 9th of July, 14th of July, 1st of August, whatever comes next. And until then, it's a lot of uncertainty. And if you're now starting to ship something or starting to prepare something, and you've got that threat of 30% coming up potentially or not, you just wait because you don't want to take that risk, because it might arrive in the US, but suddenly you're paying 30%. So I think that's the biggest issue right now that everyone's been saying is really about the lack of certainty. We need to know what the tariff rate is. If it's 10%, that's not great, but at least we know what it is. And if that stays for the next 4 or 5 years, at least we can deal with that.
Yes. Anyone else want to chime in on that deal with small business?
Sure. I'll just say, ultimately, I heard this term the other day, but confidence is the new currency, right? So both government and industries need to be mindful of the ripple effects that policy decisions have on consumer trust and the cross-border commerce. So confidence and currency goes a long way. So we'll see how things shift and evolve.
And I also wanted to ask, are there resources that your associations are providing members to deal with kind of this volatile trade route sanctions or tariff shift? I would think that the other currency is communication.
Yes. We have a frequently asked questions document that we're just about to update and release to NMA members. And it's a packet that we keep of FAQs, and it can be updated very frequently because of the constant change. But so we're intentional when we release it. And so we have a good window now where this will be going out to NMA members soon. So I'll preview that. So that information and following us on currents and is important, because we try to clear through the clutter and communicate what change means for the marine industry. But also I'll do a plug or an advertisement for the Small Business Administration, SBA, one of the federal agencies here in the US. SBA has sort of two sides of the house. It has its loan and small business incentive programs, which are very proactive, and businesses, will apply and work through the small business loan provider program, which is a public-private partnership of sorts. But then there's another side of the house that is called the Office of Advocacy. And they really are the eyes and ears of impact. That if the federal government is coming out with a rule, they will do assessments on what does this mean for small business? What is the impact? And they have policy experts that cover labor and employment, tax, trade, natural resources, and environmental issues. And so we've become very accustomed to knowing the staff over at SBA Office of Advocacy and keeping them informed, because they're having conversations sometimes that we can't have directly with lawmakers or directly with cabinet level, high level staff. And so for them to be schooled on our industry and to know the impacts is exceedingly valuable for us. And we work with them very closely on the regulatory agenda. And we're all anxiously awaiting what the president is going to unveil in a deregulatory environment. And to some extent, just not having regulations has been a message within itself. But certainly there has been a promise of reducing red tape, and we look to the administration and the Office of Small Business Advocacy for information on that.
Well, that's a perfect lead in to our last section, which is on global trade and trade in the global marine economy. So we've, I know John Ady's here. Hi, John. But we've done some really good work on creating global regulations for boating. But if I look at what's happening in different parts in Canada, Europe versus what's happening in the US, it seems like there might be a divergence of where things are going, a fragmentation of the regulatory world where manufacturers are meeting conflicting tax, ESG, and trade compliance rules across different jurisdictions. So for instance, complications on aligning with carbon-related taxes and digital service taxes and global minimum tax and some of the climate change type of sustainability regulations that are going on. So Philip, I'll start with you and then I'm going to go to Robin. Where do you see the risks in all of this?
It's a good question. Let me start with a counterpoint. I think what has happened at European level, also on the trade front, but also on the regulatory front, is there's a willingness by the European Union to be more collaborative with other parts of the world, which is good news and bad news at the same time, because we need more global harmonization, and I really hope that the US can also be part of this. And the EU has really started to diversify its trade relationships. We've seen really a lot of developments that were not possible even a few months back. Like a huge trade deal is now ahead with Mercosur, so a lot of Latin American countries, with Mexico. We have the trade agreement with Canada, and there's a lot more coordination between the EU and other countries, and that's good. But at the same time, we are all aware here on this call that the US or North America, let's say, and Europe are, 85, 90% of our industry. So we have to keep aligned, we have to keep in lockstep. And that's really difficult right now. I mean, to some extent, businesses have always been used to that. The larger businesses, especially the ones that are listed, they know that they have different compliance requirements in different parts of the world, in different jurisdictions. But as you say, Michele, we've been very good at keeping the technical side kind of aligned at the ISO level, all of this boring but really, really important work to make sure we keep costs down and we keep aligned. And that's where I'm kind of not fearful, but I think it's something to keep working on between NMMA and EBI and other stakeholders, is that we keep that in place because that's important for our businesses. I mean, if we look at our trade data, for us, exports is really one of the biggest drivers of industry success in Europe for component manufacturers, for the builders of boats, etc. And the US is our main market, and that will not change, I hope. And that's really important. So we have to keep on going on that. We know that the European Union wants to modernize some of its regulatory framework also for our industry. And I hope there's someone on the US side to respond at the regulatory side. But I know that with NMMA and EBI, we have a strong partnership. We'll continue working on that. So we each make that point to our elected officials, to our regulators, so that we keep going on that. That's really important for the next years.
Yes. Robin, from your point of view, I mean, I know for me, I worked for both a European company and a US company, and understanding the changes as boats came this way and boats went that way, and the same with components. It was really nice to get such a working group on the technical side that kind of harmonized everything, because it really wasn't that way in the 90s when I was working with electrical products. So, where do you see the risk? Although if we're deregulating, it may be just as we send product out.
I feel I might have three answers to this question. And I think one is overarching theme, and I truly believe this: business is always the answer. It's very easy to get distracted with the politics of the day, the theater. Yes, that is part of my role as Chief Advocacy Officer and Senior Vice President of Government Relations. I got to stay on top of, what's happening in Washington and in state capitals. Everyone is already talking about the midterm elections. There's 33 Senate seats up. The whole entire House of Representatives is up for election. Those are, some of our champions are in there. While that is happening, business has to keep things going, right? And keep things together, so to speak. And I think it's important as an industry sector that is rather unique, that we impart that when we are talking to our elected leaders, because they don't quite always understand that. And at the same time, while we're in this deregulatory environment, you have 50 states in the United States and state capitals that are active from January to June every year, passing legislation. And so when the federal government is evolving to this, and Malloy mentioned it, we're just moving from one big bill to the next. So we've had this reconciliation process that delivered one big, beautiful bill. The National Defense Authorization Act is the next big bill. And then the question is, what is the third big bill that's going to happen at the end of the year? Will it be our appropriations? So the states are just starting to do.
Yeah. And the merry-go-round keeps spinning.
Right. Or if the federal government is in this deregulatory framework, well, Minnesota may believe in something very different for PFAS, which we know it does. And so we are faced with these reporting requirements and the states, quote unquote, filling in the gap. And I was just with John Adey last week, and we were talking about this and how important it is for the NMA state team just to stay on top of all these things and what is and isn't appropriate for states to regulate. There are areas where a state lawmaker wants to, quote unquote, do something because they feel, there may be an issue to address, and we have to go in and educate and say, well, no, actually there's federal preemption, or there's a reason why you may not want to regulate this way because it's already being done by the industry, which self-regulates, or, we're waiting on a federal regulation, and here's why that would work better. So, we're always busy on these kinds of items, but the uptick of activity at the state legislatures is unbelievable and important for everyone in business to understand. Like, the relationships now are not just your federal elected leaders, it's your state and locals as well.
Well, and I think that in a way that there's an advantage there in certain ways that you can invite those elected officials into your manufacturing plants and show them the jobs and the impact that you're having on their state. So I have one final question, because we're going to run out of time, which I figured we would. And I told Malloy what this question was, and he took pity on all of you for having to answer this. And that question is, what would a pro-trade marine policy agenda look like in this new environment? And how can we work together to shape it globally? So, John, I'm going to start with you.
Yeah, thanks. That is a big question, right? And so, first off, I do believe that the the boat building and the marine industry are naturally aligned with a pro-trade, pro-growth agenda that has been a priority for this administration. Viking, like most other boat builders, we've never really outsourced, and we continue to support hundreds of thousands of American manufacturing jobs here in the U.S. So in that regard, I think we are already in alignment with what this administration wants to do. And then even with significant vertical integration that Viking does and that other builders do as well, our supply chain has become very complex and global, as others have said, and it takes time to work through that and untangle that and to find alternatives if they are out there from a domestic source. So we are 100% behind this administration's desire to ramp up American manufacturing. But I think we also are going to need some support during that transition to that goal. I was just looking at a number yesterday, and they're projecting something like $100 billion in new tariff revenue has been collected through the end of June. They're projecting that to bump up to like $300 billion by the end of the year. Looking at Viking's exposure to tariffs, it was less than like 0.0002 of that tariff revenue. So it's exceedingly small, but it has a real impact on our company, our profitability, and our ability to employ American workers. And I think those are all things that certainly President Trump is concerned about, and we're concerned about as well. So we really—
That's a really good point. Tying the tariff and the tariff cost to the ability to keep those workers employed is an interesting perspective.
So I think what we're really looking at here, and I think one of our asks, is that we really want to find ways of using some of that revenue to be used to lessen the impact on U.S. manufacturers and also to some extent the consumer, because we need them in this as well. So I think what we need, what we would love to see is a group of like the top CEOs of several U.S. boat building companies to find a way. It sounds really easy, right? Just to find a way to sit and talk to President Trump or, one of his most senior advisors, if that's the U.S. Trade Representative or Secretary of Treasury, but just to discuss these issues and explore ways of supporting American manufacturing through this transition. Again, we're on board. We just need a little help and we need a little time getting there. So Viking, we are 100% ready to participate or help with this idea if there's interest, but I think that's the way this gets done. I know the other sectors have been, utilizing this in some way. The automakers and the aviation sectors have had some progress. And I think the other thing that we absolutely have to be asking for is a dollar for dollar tax credit for qualifying U.S. manufacturers to offset tariff impacts at least over the next 5 years. I think this would be a great starting point. Certainly from our standpoint, it would help us as a U.S. manufacturer to keep us competitive, to maintain that strong market share that we have domestically and we're looking to grow internationally. It would help us mitigate the tariff burden on the consumer, and we're already in a difficult market. We can't afford to put any more obstacles in the way of them buying a boat. This would absolutely promote reshoring and domestication of our supply chain in a more manageable time frame. And I absolutely think it acknowledges and it supports the manufacturers who have never left or outsourced. We've always been here. Let's be a part of this success story. So I also think too, again, this really helps us remain profitable, but also the most important thing I think is to retain our workers. Our workforce is one of our biggest assets. They are skilled craftsmen, boat builders. We can't afford to lose them, and it's hard enough finding skilled, tech-focused workers in the marine space. We just cannot afford to lose them. So we have to believe that this administration is open to supporting American-based manufacturers like Viking, like other boat builders. It's just a matter of us getting to the right people. And I think that is what our ask, our mission needs to be right now.
And for as a follow-up for you, for the people on this call, what actions can they take? Viking, Brunswick, and a couple of other manufacturers have really been at the forefront of being out there and forward with the changes happening in Washington. What do you think other companies that are on this call can do? How can they get involved besides calling you and asking?
I'll take that. As you know, ABC is a great advocacy gathering, but it's much more than that, right? I think those personal relationships with lawmakers, within congressional districts and senates, like I mentioned earlier, there's 33 Senate seats, up for re-election. 435, members of the House of Representatives that are up for election every 2 years, invite them to the facilities, right? And I think, we have requests out to the administration for various levels of meetings. It is an exceedingly crowded space. And our industry is really small in comparison to some other industries, and we are even a newer industry compared to others that have been around much longer than marine manufacturing. And I think being strategic in our partnerships and how we show up and who we show up with, and making sure people who are at the top really understand how to utilize their power and leverage those relationships, I think is really, going to be important for us. For the pro-trade agenda question you asked, it's all about equal access and equivalency and standards. I think those are things that we can all work on together. We all support the facilitation of sport, tourism, well-being, heritage, and tradition. That really unifies us. And I think the more we talk about that unifying factor, we can work on some of these, more delicate issues that have landed in our laps.
Yeah, absolutely. Marie-France, do you want to chime in on this and talk about what you see as the pro-trade agenda?
Yes, thanks. I think, a modern pro-trade marine policy needs to go beyond tariffs. So it's about ensuring the supply chain fluidity that we talked about, removing unnecessary trade barriers, aligning tax, regulatory, and infrastructure policy to support growth. So the marine industry is deeply interconnected, and uncertainty in one country impacts the whole chain. That's why cross-border associations are critical, and we can share data, coordinate message, and present a unified voice to policymakers. So I think, when we speak with a unified voice across Canada, the US, Europe, and beyond, I think we have a far greater chance of shaping policy that reflects the interconnected nature of the marine industry. So it's not favoring one country over another. It's really about keeping the entire industry moving forward.
Absolutely. And Philip, would you like to give some final words on that?
That's not easy, but I think that's the point that you just said, Marie-France, is really important. Business gets on with it. I mean, as we can show here, we're all working together between NMMA, Europe and beyond, and I think that's really important. I think if we would be able to just get on with it, it would be a lot easier. We'd be able to solve a lot of these issues between us. I think it's really about certainty. That's the baseline that we need at the moment. That's really the baseline. We need to show that we are a unique sector, and Robin put that very, very precisely. But I think it's also important to show the integration in our industry, the global integration, the importance of imports as well. And even if a boat is imported from Europe, there's a lot of American-made products, components, engines on there, which support American manufacturing, and vice versa. It's the same message that we're bringing also to the European Commission. If you import a boat from the US, but doesn't mean that all of the value of a boat has gone to the US. No, a lot of the value is actually generated in Europe, in tourism, in leisure, in manufacturing, in refit, in maintenance, and so on. The boat has a long lifetime and generates a lot of value throughout that lifetime. And I think that's a really important point. What we've been able to do in the last couple of months and last year, I guess, is to hammer home the message that we are, as the boating industry, with all our components, with all the finished products, we're one of the top 20 manufacturing export sectors in Europe. And that's really helped us to get that recognition at European level, not just for trade policy, where we are more and more being heard, but also in other areas of policy, as you said, Marie-France, around infrastructure and industry policy. We're seeing, for the first time at European level in the coming months, an industrial maritime strategy, and we've seen in the consultation documents that the European Commission considers the recreational boating sector part of that. And all of that is really good news. But we do have to deal with that underlying issue of uncertainty. And I really hope that by 1st of August, at least between the European Union and the US, we'll have something going back to a good relationship and normality, so we can deal with all the other issues that we can deal with best.
Absolutely. There was one question that came in from James, who says, and it's toward you, John. It isn't where the product is even being manufactured as it was previously a seen country of origin. Tariffs based on where the raw material is melted and poured. This is one of the biggest challenges we see as a UK manufacturer with a sister company in the US trying to navigate using and sourcing US stainless steel with required properties. We will likely be influenced by US-EU deal as opposed to UK-US trade deal despite manufacturing all items in the UK. Is John seeing these types of challenges with components used in Viking yachts, and any insights into what their supply chains are looking at? I think to a certain degree you answered that, but this piece about where raw materials are being melted and poured is a little bit different.
Yeah, and I think this highlights one of the challenges, and one of the points I made earlier is that when we started looking into this, it was far more complex, and quite frankly, some of our suppliers weren't even in a position to readily provide an answer. They were going to have to go back to their supplier to trace where that material was coming from, and so we are having those conversations. Like, he mentioned stainless. We import some stainless products from Canada. We import stainless nuts and bolts from China. And some of those things, are easy to look around and shop for a domestic source if we need to. Some things are far more complicated. So it's difficult. And I think when we have our conversations with our suppliers, there is this resistance to the effect of like, well, we'll just do a price increase. We'll pass that along. And we're very resistant to that. We're pushing back. We're saying, no, you need to drill down. You need to go into this. You need to find out where the material is coming for, what tariff it's subject to, give us the HTS code. We've got to have all that, because at some point these may change, and we don't just want a price increase flat across the board. We want to have some way of responding to it, taking action to it, seeking exemptions if those avenues present themselves. So it's a lot of work. It's going to impact productivity, no question about it. On the flip side, we have this deregulation, which could potentially offset some of the other burdens we have on companies. So it's going to have to sort out. But yeah, it's a challenge.
It's a very different conversation than right whales.
Correct.
So if anyone has any questions, please put them in. While you're putting your questions in, I would like to thank Malloy McDaniel of S3, all of our panelists, Robin, Philip, Marie-France, and John, our sponsors, Brunswick and Viking Yacht Company, and all of you for joining us today. Finally, I have an announcement. We are planning something big with the IBEX team at IBEX, something that has never been done before. It will take place on Wednesday, October 8th from 7:30 a.m. to 10 a.m. It is it's called Mix, the Marine Ideas Exchange. It is a mix of 35-minute educational sessions mixed in with opportunities to network. However, the change or the uniqueness of it is that senior leaders within this industry will become the catalyst for this event. They will be on stage talking to each other and presenting. So we invite you to stay tuned for more information about that. The lineup and the leaders and CEOs that are speaking, presenting, and on or leading panels is exceptional. And you can go to ibexshow.com/special-events for general information right now. And at the beginning of August, we will be unveiling the sessions. I know what they are, and I am really excited about it. We'll be covering topics like leadership, culture, branding, marketing, technology, and the future of the industry. So topics that are timely but not usually part of the not your technician's track that you'd get in a different situation at IBEX. So stay tuned for more information about that. And thank you all for being here today.